So, Hany, thank you so much for joining me. Welcome to the Dark Night of the Soul Unwrapped.
It's my absolute pleasure, Fiona. I think you and I have been silently planning for this for the last maybe two years or something, and finally it's here. One of the things that you don't plan, but you kind of anticipate. So here I am. Here we are.
Fantastic. You just said before we started the call, it's been a long journey. So hopefully we'll get to cover as much of that as we can.
Yeah,
To
absolutely.
start with, I'd love to delve a bit into what was happening for you just before the Dark Night started.
Well, I think there for me there were two beginnings for the Dark Knight. I think there was a beginning that was obscured, was something that was more um, unlabeled, unknown, ungiven any description. And I think that beginning, probably now that I'm, you know, in a different kind of expression of the Dark Knight, I think that beginning was probably when I was born.
Hmm.
I think the Dark Knight doesn't just suddenly start. I think the Dark Knight is a theme that runs through life. For me, that beginning now in retrospect, I think even at the age of 8, I think there was something happening in my life that I could not really explain. I even as a child, I tried to even express to the adult circle in my family or friends or church, one way or the other, but there was no kind of explanation. I just felt odd and I felt um, peculiar and I felt unique, but I could not put these words on how I felt at that time. So the beginning was not really a beginning. It was something that came into existence when I came into existence, really. Um, but then I spent about, I think about 30 years or something, trying to navigate what this is and what this means until someone I was working with, a friend slash therapist. Um, he he had a session with me, and he stopped the session and said, "This is too intense. This is the dark night of the soul, and I have to stop here because I have no idea how to navigate this anymore." And he switched from being a therapist to a complete emotional support friend. Um, and when that came into my even when that came into my understanding and my consciousness, I completely shoved it aside because I this is foreign, this is unknown territory, this is not part of the familiar, you know, stuff that we hear about, uh, so I shoved it aside. And then I think it was 3 years later that I went online, um, and I started to read about the Dark Knight. Um, and it was an article that was written by someone. I think he was based in the States, or I can't remember where, but I think I think I was 40, maybe 43 years old or 44 years old, and 43 years old of 43 years old of searching for what that means. Um, and then I read the article and I looked at the name of the person that I can't remember, and I silently said, "This person knows me more than I've known myself in the last 43 years." Um,
Hmm.
because the article said everything that I've been experiencing. It was a very detailed, very, very, you know, uh, well articulated description of the Dark Knight. Um, and then I started to navigate. Uh, you came into the picture, so you probably know the rest.
So, yeah, I think it's really fascinating what you said about really it coming into existence when you came into existence. From where you are now, do you think that some of us are simply predisposed to it, or we have it somehow woven in woven into the fabric of our being, or what's your sense of what the Dark Night is now?
Well, naively speaking, you know, I could sit comfortably on my chair and say, "Oh, the Dark Knight gets triggered by a trauma or by an incident or by a compounded, you know, list of things that happens to us growing up and in adolescence and early adulthood." I can sit and comfortably do that, but it's not. It's I think the Dark Knight is almost a way of um redeeming, and I don't like to use the word redeem, but I think everyone at some point goes through the Dark Night of the Soul. I think um, uh, it doesn't happen to us suddenly. It doesn't happen for a reason. Because this happened to me, so I now going through it. It doesn't work like that. I think it's a natural part of evolution. And
Mm.
even though at the beginning I kind of cursed my existence, why I'm experiencing it. And then later, I think you and I have spoken about this, is that I felt that everyone must go through it because it's the only way for the truth to be revealed. Um, Obviously, not the only truth, not the only way, but one of the most fundamental ways. Yes.
At the point when your previous therapist said to you, "This is too intense. This is the dark night of the soul." How was that for you at that point when you presumably you'd not heard the phrase before?
Uh, Well, this was supposed to be an hour, 45 minutes, 1 hour session. Um, it lasted 3 hours. Um, and by the end, he was someone, he is still someone who's quite experienced. He's been doing what he's doing for many years. And he looked at me, he said, "I have never seen this in my career. The depth and the darkness and what's coming out in the session." And once he said, "This is the dark night of the soul," a part of me just sank into it and felt,
Hmm.
"Oh no, that feels absolutely right." Even though I had zero knowledge of what that means, and even though I left the session drained, exhausted, and not wanting to move on any further in my life, and I did not investigate what that means. Although looking back, that would have probably been a wise decision to go back and say, "Oh, wait, that sank well. Let me now investigate." But I didn't. But it sank. It's just sat very well for me. It just said, "Ah, well, that's a name. I've spent my life unnaming stuff, but that was one name I can really get on board with because it just felt right."
That's so interesting. I mean, I had a similar-ish experience where within the first few weeks of me falling into the dark night, I came across that phrase, and it was like same thing. You know, I didn't really know what that meant, but it was just a sense of that's it, that's it. I mean, I find it really fascinating this idea that, as you said, I think all of us go through something, but it does feel like this is a very particular experience that not that many of us go through. So I'm just wondering about that. As you said, you know, your therapist at the time had never seen that before. Uh,
I don't.
Do you
I don't.
do you think that do you think that everybody goes through the dark night?
Well, this is going to sound a bit, abstract, but well, one, he didn't know what that meant because he did not elaborate. He did not say, "All right, now that this is something we can talk about. Let's just sit and talk about it. I might not be the right person for you, but let's just investigate." But I think he knew, but he knew out of desktop research or just something
Right,
that
right.
he theoretically knew, but not experientially knew. Um,
Yes.
and when I say everyone goes through it at some point, I'm looking at time and space as a continuum, and I think um, I happened to fall into the lifetime where the Dark Knight
Uh-huh.
happened. So I think
Right.
let's take a family member. Let's take my father. I don't think my father in his lifetime went through the Dark Knight, but if we look at life, life as a continuum, um, somewhere on that continuum, the soul experiences the dark night of the soul, but
Right.
not necessarily in the form of my father. Maybe I'm not talking about any sort of anything in particular. I'm not hinting at anything, but I'm just saying it's a continuum, and somewhere on that continuum, someone experiences, because it is the undoing of something, and it must happen for something to happen.
Right. So, yeah, I love this word undoing.
Yeah.
I think there's something really profound in this because we're being undone in that place, aren't we? It isn't that we're somehow embarking on an undoing that we've chosen. Can you say a bit more about what undoing is for you?
Um, the thing is with the Dark Knight, I think you and I have spoken about this, is that, and maybe because of what I do for living, for me, words are not just words. It's more of a lyrical expression of something unseen. So the words that I use in daily life, or when I write, or when I working with on a project, for me the word carries the spirit of an emotion or a sentiment, and I think words started coming up for me during the Dark Night, and then a week later or a month later, that word is no longer relevant. And so another word would come up. Um, and then that word disappears and evolves, and it doesn't disappear, it evolves. And then I spoke to you about this. As I said, I'm going mad because the word that I was using yesterday is no longer useful for me today. And I'm trying to find another word. And you can't find words, so randomly. So you have to wait for the word to emerge on its own, in its own sweet time. So the word undoing was one of those words that felt so right at first. And then I said, wait, now that I'm hearing it, it doesn't feel like I haven't undone anything. I think I was just, now the word that comes to mind is, I was just removing layers of
Mm.
stuff that were not really mine. Um, Call it societal, call it education, call it parenting, call it religious, call it spiritual, call it political, call it economical. I call it, upbringing, and you know, I don't know, but the stuff that was being undone, if you want to use that word, was the stuff that was not really mine anyway. Um, and I had to stand up and just unlayer each one of them one at a time, so I can finally get to know the person that is of my own creation, and not the created version of me that you know these layers have created, if that makes any sense.
It makes complete sense. I mean, to come to the words first, I mean, my experience is so similar to that, that there would
Yeah.
be a word would emerge. I think it's important to say for people who haven't experienced this, how much this isn't, we're not talking anything coming from the intellect, right?
No.
So
No.
there's a when we say emerge, it's literally a sort of coming up from the being, or from our bodies. And exactly the same experience, there would be a sense of like, oh, this is whatever the word was. And then it would be, yeah, that would be alive for as long as it was. And then that, like you say, you'd sort of go, oh, this isn't, oh, that's not that anymore. And it would morph into then whatever the next thing to emerge was. So, and I think there's something about seeing how, when we feel words in that way, there's such a there's, as you were saying, there's such a deep energetic component of this, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's not simply the recognizing of something, but there's something about the way that the words emerge that allows us to feel things, I think, at much greater depth, because we know what it is. And often I think the words are not necessarily words that we would use in everyday life, right? They're certainly not clinical words.
No, no. I think the one thing that you realize over and over and over again is that you're not, like you said, this is not an intellectual process. Actually, the one part that keeps um, getting the hit is the intellectual part, because I think it was at some point I could practically, literally, or I could hear my mind saying, I can't do this anymore. I'm sorry, I'm gonna have to stop now, because this is territory that is completely unfamiliar for me. I'm gonna have to now follow your lead instead of leading you into this, because I can't do it. And then I thought to myself, okay, let me take this literally. And I remember I told you this. I said, wait, I'm someone who writes for a living. So I thought, wait, this is saying I can't do it. And then you and I spoke a little bit about the I part. Um, and then the I part, which is very debatable in the spiritual world. I'm not
For
going to go into
sure.
that now,
Yeah.
but the I said, I stop here, and now something else has to begin, that goes beyond the intellect. And then you realize that you're not choosing any of these words anymore. These words just come through you, and they pass through you, and then they leave, and something else comes out, and you become just like a vessel. um, you're holding on to nothing, absolutely nothing.
Absolutely. The word dropping comes and goes for me, that there's a dropping of things, a
Yeah,
shedding of things. And I love I love what you said about the layers as well, just this movement through the layers of things that ultimately weren't yours in the first place.
yeah, yeah,
Absolutely. And I think there's something about, particularly at the beginning, I think one of the things that's really terrifying about this is that we don't know that those layers aren't us,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
So until we
yeah,
have a little bit of experience in the terrain, we think that it's us that's falling apart.
yeah. I mean, you're right. I think there's so many I could list down and say, oh, that was the worst part, and then even that, doesn't last long, because there's another worst part of this.
You're right.
But
Yeah.
they all become not worse than one another. They all become stages
Mm.
of that journey. But I think not knowing can be very, very, very scary. Um, and it becomes so scary that it stops being scary, if that makes any sense. Like, it becomes so scary that your fear runs out of itself, and then you're left with just vastness of
Mhm.
absolutely having, you know, you never really run out of fear, but you run out of the fear that stops you, and then step into the fear that starts to motivate you and inspire you and drives you closer and closer. But the not knowing is scary. And then you ask yourself, wait, I believe X, Y, and Z. Is that really me? Has that
Hmm.
worked for me? And then you start answering questions pragmatically and say, wait, me believing in X, Y, Z is not really mine, because I could really trace it back to that kind of institution or that kind of person in my life. And sometimes you can't trace it back, but fundamentally that this is not you, because if it was yours, you would rejoice in it, uh, uh,
Yeah.
so you have to start sitting down with your belief system and say, is this mine? Has this worked for me? Or can I let it go and find out what I really fundamentally, on a very core level, believe as me?
Mm. I think what you said about the intellect and the switching of that it's no longer leading, it has to follow. I think that's such a key part in this. And I think once we get the sense of that, once we start to really taste into almost what it is to follow rather than trying to lead, trying to push or fix or manage, control, all of that, that this does become something else, doesn't it? I think, I often think about it in almost geographical terms that, we're in a different we're in a different landscape with a different language,
Yeah,
and we're learning as we would if we went exploring to different land. We're discovering what that land is like, and as you say, we turn a corner and think, it can't be worse than this, and then it is worse than
yeah,
from that perspective, it is worse. I
yeah.
think there were ideas, or not so much ideas, but maybe metaphors or images that helped me. And one of those was realizing that I was in the underworld, that notion of being in the dark, like Persephone in the underworld, spending my time there. Were there myths, images, anything of that ilk that supported you?
Yeah, I think one I think I've read this somewhere and I can't remember where I read it, where I read it, or who's the author of this, but I think it was probably a sarcastic spin on the Dark Knight. One of the because once I started discovering the Dark Knight, my social media feeds were starting to pick up on dark humor with the Dark Knight.
Right.
I think it was a dialogue between you know two people, two characters, and one of them is asking the other, "Oh, so tell me, how did it feel falling down from heaven?" And he said, "I can't tell you about that, but I can tell you how it felt making my way up from hell." Um,
Mm.
so so this exactly is just a fantastic spin on things because for a very long time, I thought, oh, okay, so now I'm have to adapt to Earth and I have to make my way into the human experience. And I thought, that doesn't sound right. This sounds like I'm actually making my way up and not really making my way down. it's
Mm.
not a, it's not that direction. It's the opposite direction. And I think when I read your book and I came across the word underworld, it kind of mirrored that kind of feeling. It wasn't my word, but it was a word that I had to find its equivalent in my world. So
Right.
I thought the underworld was a very authentic expression because it does feel that you're 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 lurking in that world that is dark and you can't see much. Um, you're basically navigating, almost blindly until a little bit your eyes start to open up into something that you never expected. But for me, I had to find my way, my word, and my word was countless, countless rock bottoms and absolute hell, absolute hell. It was just, it was the word. The word is a bit tragic, but it's true.
Yeah. And in that place, what was happening day to day? I mean, certainly for me, when I was in the underworld, I absolutely couldn't function in the outside world. I mean, it just couldn't happen. How
Yeah.
how was that for you?
Um. Well, getting out of bed was an accomplishment that I did not realize till I think you and I spoke of it, and you said, "Trust me, Hany, getting out of bed is an accomplishment." So I started seeing it as an accomplishment, even though it felt when I opened my eyes in the morning and I saw the light coming through, I said, "Oh shit, this is it's just another day. I'm still here." And and the mix of hopelessness, but the courage to step into the day and simply take a shower, have my coffee and a biscuit was for me an accomplishment. Um, and I'm unfortunately a perfectionist that is driven by action. Even though I'm on the creative side, but creative people always look for stimulus and inspiration and action to be engaging in one way or the other. So to silence that so that something else can come up more naturally was another accomplishment. So sitting silently almost helplessly on my couch for 3 hours, 4 hours every day, to silence the need to act, the need to be, the need to go, the need to achieve, and just surrender to the absolute paralysis of all of it, while realizing that even the paralysis, surviving it, acknowledging it, and letting it be is a bloody achievement. Um, and then the days started to pick up, so I could, do what I've said. So I get up, take a shower, have coffee, and then maybe sit on my laptop and write for 15 minutes. And then that
Mm.
became a walk when the weather allowed me to walk. And then the walk became, a drive. And then the drive became a piece of music that is so gradually as I let it all happen, even though it was absolutely excruciatingly painful, something started to emerge slowly.
Absolutely. I mean, that was the word that was in my head as you were talking, was excruciating. I think, the idea that sitting on your couch for 3 hours could be the most excruciating thing you could do, I think wouldn't make sense unless you know what it is to be in this place. And yeah, absolutely excruciating. And I love how you described how in the giving of yourself to that, when we do finally give up the notion of being or doing or fixing or all of those things, that something does seem to start to open up despite ourselves, right? I mean, I know for me it wasn't that one day I woke up and thought, oh, I feel better now, so I'll go out. I just found myself going out regardless of how I felt. And there's somehow things start to open up in almost imperceptible ways, don't they? It's like you say, you start
Yeah.
writing for 15 minutes or and yeah, I'd love to hear a little bit more about your your emergence out or up.
Yeah. Well, um, I'm still emerging. So
Yeah, me too.
I, I don't think I'll ever be able to answer that question in the way that maybe the audience expects, because I'm sure the audience that will listen to this, just like you and I probably, wanted answers, wanted resolutions,
Right.
wanted relief, and there these words will automatic. I don't want to be, dark, but these words will fall away because it's not about getting any answers, at least intellectually, at least, deliberately. It's not about resolution and emergence. Um, uh, as such, you keep emerging, and when you start to soften these words, the real emergence happens. The emergence that you don't calculate much into, how can I make it happen for myself? Because uh, I would literally write at night for half an hour, and then I would literally feel the dark night is saying, sorry, but um, this is not about you. uh,
Right.
this is not about you. I'm sorry if you think you're too significant for this, but I mean, you are carrying something so significant, but it doesn't mean that it's all about you. So you become humbled, and once you become humbled, you truly realize how grand you are, and that's a paradox. I don't know if that makes any sense, but the humility leads you to expansion. um and I think, for me, if I come to answer your question truthfully, I think this is the emergence is when you start, once you unlayer all the layers, you start to see yourself as you are. And I think that never ends. And that's the emergence, is when you start seeing you with every day a little bit more, um, with challenges, with, accomplishments. These words are not really accurate here, but I think the emergence, which is ongoing, um, just like the Dark Knight does not begin, the Dark Knight does not end. Uh, but it's a constant process of emergence, if that makes any sense.
It makes complete sense. Yes, I think for me there was something about those years of intensity that I think of as the dark night of the soul, the time when I was very much in the underworld full
Yeah,
time.
yeah,
And then the just as you said, this process of whatever we want to call that, emerging or undoing, or and I think I love what you said about this not being about us in a sense, because from the outside, it absolutely looks like it is, doesn't it? I can see that from the
yeah, yeah,
outside,
yeah,
it
yeah.
could look like solipsism or, being really self-centered or self-focused and yet in the humbling that happens, there's also an undoing of that and a sinking into something that, often the words that come for me are to do with humanity and humaneness.
Yeah,
That when we stop seeing ourselves as either more than or less than,
that's right.
and I think both are, even though they feel different, they're just flip sides of the same coin, right? Whether
Yeah,
I
yeah,
see myself as inferior and defective or special and brilliant, it's part of the same thing, isn't it? And you alluded earlier to the sense of I, and I know that's probably another whole conversation, but for
yeah,
me, there's something that in the dark night, that's alchemized in some way, such that it starts to be able to see itself much more clearly. That the layers of delusion and insanity that are all part of that layering you talked about. As that starts to fall away, I think we do get much more clarity about what this is in all its facets. So it
yeah,
isn't some idea that like, oh, we transcend or we become something better in that sense. I think we just start to have a completely different relationship with ourselves that that any kind of, certainly in my experience, none of the spiritual teachings even touch the sides of what that is.
yes,
And
yeah,
the fluidity that comes with that, we can, I as we know, you can be having a deep experience of the miraculousness of our existence one day and be right into something else the next day. So, as you said with the words, it isn't as if these experiences or insights get carried over longer than they last.
yeah, yeah. And I think you're saying so much, and I'm so like want to capture all the richness of all of this, but I think I'm just gonna follow my own river, as I would call it. I think um the dark night starts, and I'm using the word start for now, starts when you no longer can resort to an external source for answers. And I think everybody stops and says, sorry, I have no idea. Um, now this is you on your own. And it's scary because, you know, only you can do this and only you can do it. And only when you realize that you can do it, the right people will come into the picture. Um, and I think you've said something really important. I think when I used to write at night, I would start writing, and all I write about was helplessness and hopelessness. And I would write about how that feels for me. And it would get dark and dark and dark, and I would just write, keep writing, and then somewhere along the way, something shifts immediately in the same paragraph, and I start writing about the shift, and then the shift from hopelessness to um, you know, having something to hold on to that actually can allow me to go to bed and wake up the next day to continue. So the shifts for me were happening so quickly, yet so slowly, because time kind of lost. Anyway, you and I have spoken about this,
Yeah.
and time and space can never be. You can't. you said something. You said so many nice things when you and I were used to talk about this. You used the word time. The Dark Knight is not a linear process. You can't map a progress that you say, "Oh, I was, and now I am, and now I will be." You can't do that. It's just not possible. So it's not linear at all, and you can't depend. Even though you're living 24 hours a day, but you can't let that tell you where you were and where you are and where you're going. You can't. It's just maddening. Um, and to wrap this my answer up on that front is just like time and space become a continuum. So are our dualities. So the last I've read before diving full head on with the Dark Knight was non-dual teachings, and I thought, okay, let me read. And I obviously always curious as a creative man, I read, um, but then that stopped explaining because um, love and fear, or hate and peace, they no longer become separate, and this is where the eye becomes starts to be recalibrated, because love and fear become a continuum. um, um, and that's a bigger discussion. We won't dive into it now, but this is where things get recalibrated into your own space, and you start seeing things the way it can move you further and not delay you, and set you back.
Yeah, I love this. I think there's something about it in this that it is in some ways a shift from the paradigm of either or to a paradigm of, I mean, some people call it both and. I think of it as the paradigm of and
Yeah, yeah,
ad infinitum, because, but there's something about the taking, the moving out of that either or paradigm, which I think is so important, because that's also the paradigm of stronger over weaker, or hierarchy, or all of that, all of that. And I think, talking about it now, what comes to me is I don't think that we can ever really fully be ourselves in the way that we were talking about when we're still in that paradigm.
yeah.
And of course, as you say, we're still in the undoing of that, right? We're not describing some sort of state that's somehow
Final.
superior or final or any of that, not at all.
Yeah,
But I think there is something about being comfortable in the paradox of that, that we know ourselves to be capable of being, and that we're not trying to fit ourselves into either or anymore, to try to be that rather than that.
yeah. You're I remember, I actually remember when you said that to me during one of our chats, is when I was trying to tell you, oh, now I'm here and I'm experiencing this and it's amazing, but what if I swing back into, and then you said something like this, and I thought, this is not about swinging back into or out of. This is not either or, like you said. This is not. It's just, I don't have to make a choice every day about, you know. I don't have to have an opinion about everything.
Right.
Like. Oh, this is fear. Oh, this is love. Oh, fantastic. Now I'm in a love state. Fantastic. That should last me forever. And then I step into fear. I was like, oh my god, when will this end? Um, it doesn't work like that. I mean,
Right.
and it can't happen. It can't happen. Now you're hearing it, and I wish I heard it 20 years ago. Um, but obviously everything has a time, and you have to now. I was watching a movie last week, an Egyptian movie, and the writer said, the author of the book, um, basically created a dialogue between the therapist and the client, and the client said, "What do I do now with this?" And the therapist said, "Nothing. Knowing, knowing is enough." Um, so sometimes, we just have to know, and the knowing is the beginning, really.
Yeah. It's such a hard pill to swallow at the beginning, isn't it? That idea of nothing, like there's nothing to do. And I'm sure,
It's
like all of
maddening.
us, I mean, it's completely maddening. And I mean, I know for me, I ran about all over the place at the beginning of the Dark Night,
Same,
trying to
same here.
find somebody or some way to stop it, because
Same here. Yeah.
right, and of course, in when we're further through it, it feels like a mercy that that wasn't possible. I think at the time it feels like a catastrophe, but
Yeah.
ultimately, I think there's a real kindness in that, a real mercy that just says, No, like this is going to happen. You are going to be undone.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I almost, and this is a separate discussion, but I've almost, not almost, I did visit um, every societal institution, man-made institution to find answers. And when I was getting the answers, two things paradoxically happened. One, I said, no, that doesn't feel right. And two, I said, I have to hold on to it because, and it's almost suicidal, at least mentally, because how can you hold on to something that doesn't make any sense and it doesn't feel right? But at that point, it felt like I felt the betrayal, but also I had to survive uh, temporarily until something fits. So so and when I finally heard the term "the dark night of the soul," it made it seem like it was worth the wait because everything fell short, and now I know why. Because no one warns you about this, no one tells you about this, and no one can. You have to. The reason why you and I connect is because you went through it, and that's why the language maybe was different, but the sentiments were almost present in both of our spaces, and that's why we got together and we spoke about it. Um, so yeah,
It's almost uncanny how similar the language can be, isn't it? I mean,
yeah, yeah,
talking to lots of people from obviously around the world about it, so many times that the language is, it might, like you say, it might not be the same, exactly the same words, but there's a flavor of the language that is so uncannily similar, regardless of background. Or and I think that that's another indication for me of what you just said about any kind of other labels for it that that we might think of, like people might say, well, it's depression, or it's the coming trauma, or all of those things. As you
yeah,
say, it was like, yeah, but
yeah.
that doesn't fit, and I could, with every time I could see, like, I totally understand that's a facet of it. Or like, certainly, yeah, sure, I had lots of old childhood pain and trauma come up,
Who didn't? Yeah,
right? And we know it's more than that. Somehow we know it's not only that's part of this bigger movement that's happening. And I think having a sense of that from fairly early on is actually really useful, because I think I could hold on to those words, that phrase, the dark night of the soul, as sometimes the only validation I had of what I was in. I think
yeah,
until we meet somebody else who sits down and says, yeah, absolutely, who can affirm what our experience is. That's a
yeah,
difficult place to be, isn't it? When that's not what we're hearing from the vast majority of people and institutions around us.
yeah. No, I completely agree. I've been called depressed and anxious and bipolar, and none of this made any sense. But you know what? I had to swallow it with a pinch of salt so I can move on uh, and find out the truth about all of this. Because I had to find out, and the truth eventually came in, and when you and I started talking, I could not believe that you are in the UK. I'm in Dubai, and we have very different lives, and yet we came together, and it felt like I finally, I'm not alone anymore, because it's a very lonely place to be, and it becomes lonelier when you get called out for stuff or things or labels that they're not very true. So every time someone said, "Oh, you're going through depression," I felt lonelier. Um, when someone said, "Oh, you
Yeah.
need someone, you need to go to church, and someone needs to pray with you," and I felt, now I feel even lonelier, even more. So, but finally, and the beauty of this is that you meet someone from a very different walk of life, and geographically miles and thousands of miles away from you, and yet you come together, and that's the beginning of feeling, okay, so this is not about me.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I love that. As you say, this is an intensely lonely place to be, isn't it? When you're right in the throes of the dark night. Is for anybody who's listening to this, who's in that place, what would you like to share?
um, Find an outlet. For me, it was writing, and luckily I write from my job, so I wrote, and I wrote even if it made no sense, even when sometimes I used to angrily shut down the laptop, and say profanities to my existence. I still opened the laptop the next day, and I started writing again, and when I finished writing and I went back to it, I felt, okay, all right, so now a piece of the puzzle is in place. I can move on, one step at a time. So, one, find an outlet, whether it's walking, dancing, swimming, talking, um, uh, something that activates your creative side. We're all have that in us, and I think if you find an outlet for yourself that can be of some comfort, and that would be amazing. Obviously, I'm not gonna sit down and make promises. Oh, this will end, and this will be amazing, and you'll
Yes.
be triumphant, and you know, you know. Yeah, you are here, I am here. We're talking about it. So, if that's not enough, for the listener to get a bit of a hug, um, uh, you know, just find an outlet, and one step at a time, not even one day at a time, one moment at a time, and uh, you breathing in and out is a sign that something wants you here, um, and maybe that will not make you smile, but it at least make you just know that something is happening in the background.
Thank you. I really love that. Something absolutely wants you here, and yeah, hopefully just hearing us talk about all of this acts as a hug. That's beautiful.
That's all we need sometimes. Is just it's just a hug, and someone who looks into your eyes with in absolute utter silence, and just smiles. So that from you strip life back to its basic beauty, and we're all in it. We're all in it. So why not?
Absolutely. Honey, thank you so much. It's
My
been an
pleasure,
absolute
Fiona.
pleasure.
My pleasure. I think how dear you are, uh, to me, and this is about companionship, and you and I are connecting now on a very different level, and I'm happy to see what the future holds. Even though the future is just another word, one of those words. But thank you so much for asking me to do this, and we'll talk again for
My
sure.
pleasure. See you soon.
Take care, Fiona. Thank you so
Bye.
much.